Well, we have the pleasure of having Misha Peters come and talk about the OpenBSD Hypervisor in the wild. There'll be time for question and answers at the end, so please hold your questions until then, and we'll leave a few minutes at the end. And with that,
thank you. It's a little bit weird that you're introducing me, though, being the guy that's written it all, and some other people here. So, good morning, welcome. I like the intimate room that I'm in. It's really nice. So I'm going to talk about the BSD hypervisor, OpenBSD hypervisor, that I'm using for OpenBSD Amsterdam. First, I have to apologize. I'm presenting this from a Mac. I was not planning to, but I'm flying to the US, and I don't like to take my personal notebook into the US, so that's why I'm using on my work notebook. This is my personal notebook, so that you know. And a little bit about me. I started way back when at Access for All, ISP in the Netherlands, when it was like this in the picture. And since then, I started working for vendors. So I worked for companies like Blue Code and Foundry that people might know. And I also started around that time with FreeBSD. Later on, added OpenBSD to the mix. And when Mike started working on the hypervisor, I thought, oh, this is great, so let's do that. So I'm going to talk about how it all started, the setup, the things that I've seen, what users are experiencing, so hopefully you get a good picture of what's going on. And I've done some hosting and co-location since '99 as a little bit out-of-hand hobby that snowballed. But what about you? So who's using OpenBSD? Ooh, cool. Who's using VMM VMD? Who's on OpenBSD Amsterdam? Yeah, all right, cool. That's pretty good, awesome. So, how did it all begin? I was always using forms of segmentation or virtualization, always looking for something that was running on the BSDs properly or useful. So I started with jails, still using jails. I really like jails. Then came Beehive, for me at least. I do like Beehive. I think it's a little bit too complex, so I was very happy when Mike started working on VMM VMD, and I just moved everything since I'm not running any Linux VMs anyway, so that helped. The other thing is, what I noticed on my co-location side was that a lot of people were moving to the cloud. So a lot of people would just leave, remove their hardware. So I had some rack space left, I had some hardware left, I had spare IP space, IPv4 space, I must say. And I also always wanted to have a domain with something BSD. And I think Hessler has taken a lot of the cool ones, and probably some others here in the room, and I went, okay. And then .amsterdam came along, and I went, oh, okay, maybe I can do something with OpenBSD.amsterdam. So that, and I also wanted to find a way to actually contribute back to the community. I'm not a C coder or coder that much, I'm a spaghetti scripter, so I can get things done, but not in a very structured fashion. And I also wanted to see and help out a little bit how far we can actually take this thing and where things were breaking. So that's how it all started. So on the right-hand side, you see a picture of some of the machines that we're using. And domain for shits and giggles, so I registered it last year in June. And that's when the whole, or April actually, March, and that's when the whole thing started kicking off. So where is it? It is in Amsterdam. It's actually in a data center in Amsterdam. I don't live there, but all the hardware is there. It's in the Access for All data center, which is KPN these days. And it's all running primarily on Dell R610s connected to a Foundry switch, connected to a Foundry router. I work for Foundry, so I have a love relationship with Foundry. I get the CLI. I've tried Juniper. It doesn't really stick. And I buy these things on eBay, so it doesn't really cost a lot of money. So it started on Twitter. I started talking a little bit with people on Twitter, say, hey, what can we do? Would you host a VM? And the first machine I brought online which was some of the spare hardware that I had. It's a box with 8 gig of RAM. There's still some VMs running there. And this was actually one of the first, let's say, official tweets that I sent out. And I also wanted to know what people were willing to pay. So I sent out a poll on Twitter and say, hey, what are you willing to pay for a VM that looks like this? So a lot of people are around the €5, this is in euros, €5 mark. And I went, okay, that's fine. So started building VMs based on that. So they're €5 a month, and of the donation, or of the yearly fee, I donate €5 to the OpenBSD Foundation. €10, sorry. Then I was able to get rid of some VMs that I was running on this machine that I brought online. And this was actually the machine that kickstarted the whole thing. This was able to take 50 VMs on it. And out of that came the first donation to the OpenBSD Foundation, which I thought was really cool. And I was able to donate €400 based on the first month of running this. So a little bit of the statistics, so you know where we are. The last donation was €370, 850 last year, 1,700 year to date, totaled of 3,500 euros. I'm running 8 hosts. I still count the first one, even though it's doesn't really. I want to move them. There's only 10 VMs currently running on there, but I still count it. And there's roughly 280 VMs. So we had some renewals already, and what I'm seeing is that the amount of renewals, or the amount of people that don't renew, actually get replenished by people that get a VM. So it's pretty stable. And I really want to break through the 300. No idea why, but it's this mental thing that I want to get. So what do you get? You get an opinionated VM. If you've been on the website, that's what you see. You get an opinionated VM. So initially that meant I decide the install sets, I pre-configure a couple of things, and it's running OpenBSD VM on OpenBSD. I'm not going to give you a Linux VM or anything else. It's an OpenBSD VM. Now with 6.6 coming and sys upgrade, I'm going to let go of the install sets. I'm just going to install everything so you don't have any issues there. I heard Theo yelling at a couple of people saw Theo yelling on the mailing list. If you want to, I also asked that question to exclude certain sets from the sys upgrades process. And he went, don't do that. Okay. But what do you actually get? So you get 512 meg of RAM, 50 gig disks, IPv4 assigned via DHCP, even though it's a static IP address that's assigned to your VM. And you get an IPv6 subnet /56 that is statically assigned during the whole install process. And what I've noticed during doing this, I'm very used to just assign my router as the gateway. So I started adding v6 addresses on the gateway, and then all of a sudden, well, I cannot hold more any v6 routes. That's annoying. So what I started doing was actually the host is the gateway for all the VMs in regards to v6. So v4 still goes to the router itself because all the VMs are in a /24. I'm thinking about changing it because I'm hitting some snags with Bridge, and I had some interesting discussions already with some people, but that's something that I'm considering or at least investigating if there's a way around it. But personally, I do like layer 2. Is Blake in the room? Sorry. I do like layer 2. It's easy. Anyway, so what does the setup look like? I try to use as much in base as possible. So it does influence some of the design decisions that we've done, that I've done. So this is pretty much the list. So I'm using Perl, how I deploy. So I've written a deploy script in Perl. Using VMM, VMD, of course, DHCPD, auto-install, site scripts during the auto-install process, HTTP to serve the sets, and then sensors D, and I mention this specifically because I figured something annoying out, which I'll mention later, to keep track of the disks primarily, and of course, VI. So what I'm doing with Perl is I started with a very nasty script, because when I announced, hey, you can now get a VM, I had this half-baked form, and I had some information in there, and I threw it in a file, and I went, okay, so how do I actually get all these files instead of doing this manually? So I built a really nasty Perl script, and yes, you can debate if you can write nice Perl. That's fine. But what the Perl script does, it will maintain and create vm.conf. It will maintain and create dhcpd.conf. It creates an install.conf for every single VM. So every VM is a fresh install. It's not a clone of an image. I've also noticed some other quirks. So it also maintains doas.conf now. And it's responsible for the user creation as well as the VM creation. So as soon as I run that, all these things happen, and I have some flows how that works. So the VM.conf, if you're familiar with it, I assign a switch, a bridge. I always assign an owner to a VM, so you can connect to the console yourself. You can stop it, you can start it. You get a disk, and I also assign a static MAC address that Perl script creates. Because with that, I then assign the v4 address, let's say, statically. The dhcpd.conf, similar, so I have that same static MAC address. I assign an IP address, and I also say that it's now auto-install. So as soon as I boot up that VM, I must say that when it's a new VM, I also have a boot line here. So it boots from bsd.rd. So then the auto-install knows that it has to kick in. Then I have an auto-install script for every single VM that I built, again, based on the MAC address. So if you provide me with your host name, I put that in. The v6 addresses are assigned, your username that you provided, your SSH key, I cut and paste in there. And then these sets here, that will probably go away, and this will be plus site star moving forward. And because of that, I have to do continue anyway, yes, verification, yes. So that's then what the VM is being built on. Then I'm using site.tgc to actually do some pre-configuration that makes it easier for you, makes it easier for me. So it sets the install URL to cdn.openbsd.org. And it also changes the clock. Is it a format or a method, or how do you call that clock? The hardware? The source of the time counter for the kernel. Okay, the source of the time counter of the kernel. Okay. And the reason why we're doing this is because the default is i83 something something?
Yeah, I can talk about it at the end.
Okay, cool. So I'm setting this because there are some synchronization, let's say, challenges within the VM in regards to the clock. And then I set NTPD, and also I turn off the sound daemon because, well, you don't really need it. So that's in the site file. Then I'm using HTTPD on one of my hosts to actually serve all the sets, and every single host has an HTTPD running for the install files. So every single host has its own little world in regards to that. The reason why I wanted to mention sensors is that a lot of the examples that you see, you actually get, like, if disk fails, then run this command in the sensord.conf. I figured out, luckily only one disk failed, that doesn't work. You actually need to call a script out of sensord in order to actually get any action out of it. So either an email that's being sent or whatever the action might be. So I luckily caught that quite quickly. So I was able to replace the disk without any problems. But then I started digging into the whole sensord and the config and how that works. So I So this is now the way that I'm using it. So the command is on top, sensity.conf. It calls a script with a bunch of parameters that are also there, and then it sends me an email saying, hey, disk is okay at boot, and when the disk fails, it sends me, disk is not okay. So I know to replace it. So how do I actually deploy? It's not fully automated. There are still some manual steps that are there. And currently, that works for me. So as I mentioned, every host has its own little world that it exists in. So I have a configuration for a specific host. So I define the prefix of a MAC address that they use, IP address, IPv6 address, where all the files should go, and what the default setup is for a VM. So how much memory, disk, if it's one disk, two disks, what the image format is, what bridge they need to use or uplink need to use, and so on. So based on this, I just have a single script that I copy to all the hosts, and then based on the configuration, it knows what to do and what the defaults are. I thought it was a good idea at the time. So the flow in itself is I have a contact form on our website. So you put all your information in there. That sends me an email in rightly formatted. I put that in a text file. So I look, hey, which VM ID is still available. If it's full, I take a different host. I paste that in, and then I run the deploy script. I restart DHCPD, I reload VMD to actually take the new configuration, and then I start the VM and I hit A, because Pixie's not working. And I think Philip does a whole talk about how he Packerized this, but as I said, I like to use a lot of things in base, and for me, just hitting A and waiting for it to finish is fine. I can probably wrap it around expect or do something else, but for me, this works. And I don't have to deploy like 10 or 20 VMs a day. It's 1 or 2 max, roughly, in average. So this is what the contact form looks like. You can select if you want to have 512 mega memory, 1 gig, how much disk space you need, what the image format is. I default now to KeyCow2, so that I save a little bit on disk space, especially if I move it. And then based on this, I put everything in the text file, which roughly looks like this. So it's just quoted text that I just push into Perl, or that Perl parses so that it knows what to do. When I then run deploy.pl, it creates the install file, it creates the user, creates at least that's what I'm seeing. It also does the doas and the DHCP, but these are the things that I'm most interested about. If the user, it could be that the user existed already, so then I have to fix that, or something failed with the image creation. And if you select that you want more disk space, it will create 2 disks here, or 2 images here. And once the whole install is done, I run it again, and that script also removes the install.conf file. Then I do VM control reload, I restart DHCPD, and then I start the VM, and as I mentioned, I hit A. So what did we find during this whole process? One of the things is that very early on, the owner of a VM always had to be in group wheel. Now, personally, I don't find that a problem. There's this unauthorized section in the upgrade manual that says if you don't have access to the console, you can do this. We don't recommend it. And then, yeah, people can just do that. That's not a problem. And then people went, no, you cannot do this. You have to have console and yada yada. So I went, okay, right. What can we do? Is there a way that I can define another user group or another group where I can assign users so that these users can look at their VM instead of adding everybody to wheel, which I thought was not a good idea. So Reich thought that was a good idea, and he really quickly managed to put that in. So from then on, I used VMD_VMD users put all the users in so they can actually control their own VM instead of asking me. The other thing that is quite interesting if you're starting doing anything with virtual machines is you need a tap interface. By default, there's 4. So if you run more than 4, you need to create your tap interface. And this was initially a head scratcher. I thought, why is it not working? Because it wasn't really clear that it was failing on an interface. So on every new host that I deploy, I run this for loop that just creates up to 50 tap interfaces. So I always have enough. Because on average, a host runs around 40 VMs. Because that's another thing that I discovered quite quickly is that if you, especially on older hardware, if you add more VMs, weird things happen. Disk, interface, bridge, memory. So on the Dell R610s, we are using only up to 40 VMs, and that works reasonably well. Another thing is, people were supplying me with a SSH key, but I didn't want to send them a password over email, saying, hey, this is your root password. One way that I wanted to do this, and from an automation perspective, is I wanted to do this during the auto-install. So what I've been doing is actually I generate a random password with JOT. Thank you, Roman, for that. And then I add it to the authorized keys at the end as a comment. So that as soon as you log in with your SSH key, you just look into that file and you have your root password and the password of your user. I thought it was clever. I was very happy to see that Rike also thought it was clever. So he borrowed that idea. But there's probably, and this also started before DuWAS was there. Because now you could also potentially say, well, this user gets set up into DuWAS with a no pass, and then you can do whatever you want. So that would be another way that I would probably maybe do that today. Another thing was, in the beginning, was stopping VMs was a little bit of an issue. If you stop everything in one go, it's not a good idea. So I was trying to actually emulate like normal shutdown. So what I've done is I parsed VM control through a for loop with awk, looking at all the machines that were started, and then would stop them and wait for 30 seconds to stop the other one. Now you can just do that with VM control stop AW. So it would stop all, and it will wait for that VM to be stopped. In most cases, that works really, really well. Another interesting challenge is actually starting VMs. So I'm doing something similar, but instead of using stop, I'm using start. When it was a clean shutdown of the host, I used 30 seconds. If it crashed, I used 90 or more. Because what is really bad is if you have 2, worse, more VMs that are going through an FS check. That will slow things down dramatically, and it's not pleasant for the VMs that have started. So I do, hopefully I can see if it was a clean shutdown or not, but then when it wasn't not, I used 90 seconds. Another interesting one, especially in the beginning, I saw that a lot of VMs were disappearing. So they would have connectivity, and then all of a sudden, connectivity would go away, or you could not reach it anymore. So Claudio pointed me to the ARP-Q sys control that by default sits on 50. Now, in normal environments, and just for your machine in a layer 2 network, it's not usually a big of a problem. But since I'm pushing a /24 onto a host with 40 VMs, that becomes a little bit of a problem. So we saw a lot of drops, and I started playing a little bit with the numbers. I've started with 512. I still had drops. I did 756, still had drops. So I increased it to 2024. And it seemed that that is solving a lot of the connectivity issues that we've been noticing. So what are users experiencing? Because this is a little bit on the side that I've been stumbling into things. But on the user side, there's of course also quirks and things that we had to get used to. So in some cases, and this all depends on how the VM boots and at what stage it boots and what was happening on the host. But sometimes the VM gets a little bit skewed from the clock hertz of the host. And when that is a little bit off, you get a lot of clock drift within the VM. So one way, and the way that Paul is fixing this is he looks at the clock drift of the VM, and if it's too far, he just reboots the machine to see if it's a little bit closer. Now with 40 VMs or 50, I thought that was not such a good idea. So I fixed it like very rudimentary, where I suggest people just to put rdate in cron. In general, this works well. Some VMs have to screw this a little bit lower. And I have one user running Alpine, and he's on his own. He has to sync his clock every second. Another thing is that I got a lot of questions about was there's a high interrupt on the CPU within the VM. And I have a page on the website with all the known, let's say, challenges, issues. And this is, so I'm using some of the information that Mike gave me. It's like an accounting error. But I did get some question going, hey, what's going on? I don't have anything started. Is something wrong with the host? So I started compiling that list of things. And there's also links in my presentation that point to explanations of Mike or Rijk about some of the things that we've seen. So when I managed to figure out this ARP-Q thing, a lot of the connectivity problems went away, and it was great. And then all of a sudden, on a Friday, no idea why, I started getting connectivity issues again. And it wasn't just one host, it was all of them, including my own, without not too many VMs running. And I've been scratching my head since, but one great way of fixing this is just either ping from cron. So the tricky part is that as soon as it's gone, you have to start some connectivity from within the VM to the outside world. So the way that you can do that is either do it in cron every 5 minutes, but at the moment it's pretty bad that doesn't even help anymore. So what I've started doing was just starting tmux with ping -I to my gateway, and for now that seems to solve the problem a little bit. But that's a head scratcher. Another thing that we've seen is a VM can become unresponsive. So nothing to do with connectivity, but it would either consume a lot of CPU resources, and a VM control stop would not work. It would just be hanging in stopping mode. So every once in a while, if I see it, I fix it for the user, but sometimes I get an email from someone saying, hey, I cannot reach my VM, can you do something? And I'm like, okay. So I need to figure out a way that user, they can run VM control stop, but they should also be able to just kill that. And I thought about doing something with kill, and then you go, okay, yeah, root, and then do as. So the way that I worked around it was with pkill. Because what you can do, you can actually define, let's say, the string or the process specifically that you can kill. So that's why I said the Perl script now also manages doas.conf. So this part is in the doas.conf configuration, and this is then what you can use and run as a user. So you can just kill your own VM if need be, because I have all that information. And I think some people have already used it. So my wish list, what I would like to see in the future, is a working PXE that will save me from hitting A. Less clock drift, no clock drift. There's things that are possible there. Another thing that I would like to do is move away from bridge. So either looking at switch or layer 3. We had some interesting discussions already in the last couple of days around that. One of the things that I would like to do is automate more. So the whole flow of getting that email, putting it into a file, starting the VM, I would like to do that more automated so I can get that VM deployed a lot quicker. And I really want to hit that 300 just for my own fun, I would say. So I do want to thank a couple of people because I could not do this without especially Mike and Rijk and Carlos and Stefan and Claudio and Jasper and Ori. So these are the main committers and contributors to VMM VMD. And we figured out yesterday that there's around 47 people that actually made commits to VMM VMD. So that's quite impressive. And I also want to thank Roman for the artwork, for pushing, for helping, for getting the word out, wearing the T-shirt together with Rijk and Fred. And of course, you, the users that are actually getting a VM on the platform and see how far we can drive this thing. So that is my talk. Thank you very much. Awesome. And this is without background image, so it's a little bit easier to read. Any questions?
This one's dead. Oh, no, it's okay. If there's any questions, microphone's right up here, and I also have a portable one.
Or suggestions, or feedback, or say, hey, this is stupid. Don't do this. Not too many, though.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. Have you considered giving a prefix to a VM? Or I have seen in the config that you are basically giving a VM one IPv6 address?
No, a prefix.
A prefix, yeah. And is it /64 or was
56.
Yeah, but that's to the host, not
Yes.
not to the VM.
No, that's to the VM.
Oh, okay, that's generous.
And I do, of course, generate already a /28, but the host has a 56.
Okay.
Sorry, VM. Yes. Host has 4056 prefixes.
Do you have any private network options, or do you think about adding the possibility of building a VPC for a customer? Thanks.
To have 2 VMs in the private network?
Yes. Or more, obviously.
Yeah, I thought about that. I had, of all the people that are running a VM, I had that question once. Also had that question if there could be 2 VMs, active standby, active. So I've been thinking about either adding a second interface or adding a separate network segment so I can run carp, or thinking about it. But the nice thing is not a lot of people ask for it, so I don't have to think about it too hard. Yes.
So any plans to add any other locations, like new data centers or anything?
I don't have the domain, so. No, it's the nice thing is, I think someone said, hey, this is a great idea, I want to do this in London, and then he worked on the numbers and he went, ooh, I cannot really do this. The benefit that I have is, since I do hosting and co-location, I have rack space, I have IP space, I have traffic, so a lot of the costs are already carried by my own company. Otherwise, this would not really be a viable business model. With only €5 VMs. You then have to also do like the €20 a month VMs. Then it could potentially work. But I think what I personally like about the product, it's community, from the community for the community. So I don't make any money of this. I don't want to make any money of this. It's self-sustaining to an extent, I guess. And because of all the money that came out of a host, I bought the new server, and then that machine bought for or paid for the other machine. So it's self-sustaining. And I think adding a new location, regardless where that would be, probably would not work economically.
Okay, thank you again for great service.
You're welcome.
Hello. So this is a bit like a test bed for the technology, right?
That's how it started. There's a disclaimer there that it's an active development. Things break, but people don't read. So there's also DNS running in there, and there's email environments running in there. So I think there's even some people that are running production type services on this, and I go, okay, it's great.
So on a
But yeah,
1 to 5 scale for, let's say, if someone is more interested in, AWS doesn't support officially OpenBSD, and here is someone who gives a really nice environment for this. Then from 1 to 5, how would you rate the production readiness of this enterprise?
I would say try it, and then if you like it, pay it. I run all my production environment in VMM and VMD as well. I suffer from some of the quirks that the whole platform is suffering from. But for me, it works, right? Because my own company is also a hobby project. I don't have to make a lot of money out of it. But especially if you do something with payments, I would not do that. If it's a website or forum or internal communication platform, probably. Yeah, there's ways around to work around the connectivity issues that's not really a problem.
Do you collect some data about the, let's say, average uptimes of these VMs? Because you said they can become unresponsive or stuff like that. So I don't know if VMCTL shows data like this, but maybe you could do some nice graphs or whatever.
So if I get any telemetry out of the VMs, uptime, and things like that? No, I don't. I do get some telemetry out of the host in regards to CPU load and traffic, but nothing on individual VMs uptime. That's an interesting one. Yeah. So Martijn, let's get cracking on Agent X.
Thank you.
Sure. 5 minutes.
I have some questions for you about this thing.
Okay.
No, not really. I'm just want to make a statement here because, like, whenever this VMM thing started, when Mike showed me the first lines of D-message back in a bar in Berlin at some point, I was thinking it would be so nice, and excuse me for the word, to have some cloud kind of thing that runs on an OpenBSD hypervisor, right. Because all this cloud stuff is unavoidable these days, and we ported OpenBSD to most of these platforms, and then you still run on a shitty Linux or, well, maybe on a FreeBSD, but if I cannot trust the hypervisor but not just doing this for testing, really run a cloud-like platform or right. Opinionated VMs or something like this. And then later you just showed up and did it. Yeah? And it helps us so much because of these things. I mean, these features, we get many feature requests for things that are weird or pointless, but from you, it really helps moving forward.
Good.
So we need more projects like this. Really, we need people who, whatever, do something similar, and this happens deploying BGP routers from OpenBSD or whatever, just doing something like this. And then actually, you're the one who proved that you can run this stuff in production to us developers. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing. So my kudos for this here publicly.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So economically, it's a great way to do this. Do this in other cities. Thanks, Rijk.
Hi. Do you use or would you use VMMs, OpenBSD VMMs on other people's computers as a user?
Would I use VMM on other people's computer? What do you mean?
Like, you know, you host VMMs and you have users that use them. Would you or do you personally use VMMs which are hosted on computers controlled by other people?
I don't. I don't host, I don't know any other environment where you can do that, where you can actually have a VM on OpenBSD, VMM, somewhere else.
But would you, if I provided you with a VMM, would you actively use it?
Depends how much it is.
If it was free?
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
thanks.
I'm
And just-
Dutch, of course, free.
Okay. And another question about virtualization. OpenBSD was up until a few years ago completely against any kind of virtualization. And even then, you know, you need some kind of containerization if you run it on hosts you own. But now we see the OpenBSD move in another direction, in, you know, hosting, providing VMMs. Can you explain a bit change in the politics
That
or
would
strategy?
not really be a question I can answer, but Mike, maybe. If you try turning it off and on again.
The whole topic of how VMM and VMD started is probably a talk that we should have later, because we're almost out of time and it's going to take much longer than 2 minutes. But I'm happy to have that conversation with you, or indeed anybody that's in attendance, if you'd like to know more about the platform, how we built it, what our goals were, the history around it. I'm absolutely happy to do that. Just find me later today, tomorrow. I'll be around. But it probably will take more time than what we have now. So
And
happy to
there's
talk about it later.
And there's some good talks already online that you did.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. One more.
It's not really related to the OpenBSD VMM part of things, but do you do anything with do you do anything with reverse DNS, either V4 or V6?
Sorry, say again?
Do you do anything with reverse DNS?
Absolutely. Yes. I need to, because there's people running their mail environment on OpenBSD Amsterdam. So yes, yeah. Not by default. That can be something that I'm considering, but currently it's just fire off an email or put it in the note field in the contact form, say, hey, just put reverse DNS to this domain and I'll fix it. It's not a big deal. But not a lot of people actually request it. Yeah, yes, exactly. That was my reaction as well. Well, why not? But yeah. Well, actually, I have someone that doesn't have a domain. So they said, yeah, no, I want to do something with mail, but I don't have a domain. Okay, well, I can give you a host on OpenBSD Amsterdam. Oh, great, let's encrypt, done. So yeah, so that's also an option. You can you can also have a hostname .openbsd.amsterdam. I would be happy to reverse that into your VM as well, not a problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you.